Torres is an individual that I've had an opportunity to hear a lot about. It's somebody who, in my opinion, has really suffered and experienced pain at the highest level. And he's also somebody who has built a brand and built a foundation that really embodies the word selflessness. But more importantly, this is an individual that, for me, being anchored to and fascinated to the discipline of leadership, embodies perseverance, embodies grit, and embodies faith. And so without further ado, it is my pleasure to welcome Ray Rodriguez Torres to the Altered State podcast. Thanks for joining us today.
It's a pleasure to be here, Tony. Thanks so much.
Thanks, Ray. Ray, I've been exposed to your life a little bit. I don't think the subscribers and the listeners have. Give us a little visibility to, your life. You grew up in Miami. You obviously have a beautiful family. You're a fantastic father. But, as I said earlier, you suffered what I would categorize as the deepest pain that anybody can endure in life. And that's when you lost your daughter. Walk us through that pain a little bit so that we can get some visibility to what it is that you do now with Live Like Bella.
So the story of my family and that of my upbringing may not be that much different than many of the folks that are chiming in today. I grew up in Miami. I went to school in the University of Florida. I got my master's degree later in Oklahoma, and I'm the baby of my family. And so as the baby of my family, I'm one of those people that has always projected my life and planned my life many, many years in advance. For example, I knew for certain the year that I would get married, and I did. I knew for certain the year that I would have children, and I did. And I knew without equivocation that the woman that I would fall in love with and marry would be Cuban, Catholic, submissive, and a great cook. And that's the first time I learned that God has a sense of humor, because the woman that I fell in love with, and I'm still very much in love with, was an American Jewish woman who was tough as nails and cannot make a bowl of cereal without instruction. And yet my wife, Shauna, has been an immense blessing in my life and in the life of many. And, our life as a young couple was very typical in many respects. We were a young couple, and we, in 2002, had a child, our first child, precisely when I thought I had planned it. And it was a little girl. And like the birth of any child, especially a first child, there was a moment of great joy for our family. Her name was Bella. And what I didn't realize, because of my joy and ignorance of just being a doting father, is that Bella's early years were very challenged. Bella suffered low oxygen at birth when she was born. And because of that, her early years of development were challenged in that she was developmentally delayed. Ironically, my wife, Shauna, is a special education teacher. And she noticed that Bella was having and not meeting certain developmental milestones. My father, who's 94 years young today, is a pediatric cardiologist, and he was the chief medical officer of Miami Children's Hospital for 20 years. And he also separately noticed that Bella wasn't reaching certain developmental milestones. No one was in communication with each other until eventually they did. And we all realized that Bella wasn't developing as normal children or a normal child for her age. And so at that moment, she had an MRI of her brain early on, and we realized that Bella had suffered strokes in the white matter of her brain when she was a baby because of her prolonged labor. And while it was very difficult at that time, we also had some validation that we weren't just neurotic parents worried about our little girl who wasn't advancing. And we knew what it was like to go to birthday parties and be made fun of and be marginalized because Bella couldn't understand the rules to a game or couldn't articulate because of her speech delays, specifically with other children. And it was difficult. But at the same time, we were always very optimistic. And I've always been an optimistic person. And that was, who better than us? Who better than us to tackle this developmental delay? Who better than us to tackle a speech and language delay? We have all the tools available, including good health insurance, thank God, grandfather that's a pediatrician, mother that's a special ed teacher. We're going to close this developmental gap and help her. Until in 2007, something happened that would alter the course of our lives forever. I was traveling. At the time, I was an executive in the pharmaceutical industry, and I called home and I asked my wife, how did the night go? The answer was, it was terrible, which was not unusual for that time. Bella was 4 years old. But I could sense a fear and trepidation in Shauna's voice unlike at any other point. She told me that all throughout the night, Bella had been getting up out of bed and walking to this little Cinderella princess table that we had in the kitchen, and she kept falling to the floor. And by morning, she was completely paralyzed. Now, being the optimistic person that I had always been until this point in my life, I said, honey, I'm sure it's nothing serious. Perhaps it's some sort of virus that's temporarily entered her spinal fluid. And of course, the next question was, have you called Dad? And at the end of that week, after several tests, we found the cause of the paralysis. And I will never forget the moment that I was given this news when I was sitting next to my father. She was having one more MRI of her spine to see what the cause of the paralysis was. As we were getting up and we were outside of my wife's line of sight, my father turned to me privately. He was crying, and I had never seen my father cry before. And he told me, I have something to tell you, but I don't know how to tell you this. The reason why she's paralyzed is because she has cancer. She has an enormous tumor wrapped around her spine. A few days later, we learned that Bella, in addition to her spine, had cancer in her jaw, her shoulder, her rib, her hip, her knee, her foot, her left hand, and her brain. And we were told in no uncertain terms, by scouring the earth, specialists from Japan to the United States and everywhere in between, that our 4-year-old little girl would never walk again and had a few weeks, perhaps a few months to live. I can assure you that as a parent in particular, there is nothing that can prepare you for words such as those. And that's how our journey began in terms of fighting childhood cancer. Little did we know the journey that we would have ahead, the plans that God would have that would be greater than ours, and the great lessons that we would learn from a 4-year-old little girl who could barely speak, who was marginalized when she was little, and yet today resides in the glory of God.
Amen. Let me just take a moment here, because that was a really deep and profound explanation. I've never actually heard it, let alone from the father of Bella. You're a strong man. I'm sure you've shared that story many times, and I'm sure it doesn't get easier. But just having the ability to communicate it at that level, and still be painstaking about, glorifying her name, is really impressive. When you look at the parallels, how something so tragic in your life, the passing of your beautiful young daughter, and what you're doing with her name and her brand to help other children. And I am sitting here looking at that and comparing it to my walk, how something so tragic, and don't get me wrong, I am not comparing your pain. Please don't take it as that. But what I am looking at is the parallels of pain, and then how that transition and transforms into glory. Because now your platform is about helping others. And for me, when I was in active addiction with alcohol and drugs and just really, really sick, and I look at my life now and my walk today, because of God, it's also a lot of work that I put in because he's given me the energy to put in the work, and how I've been able to share my tragedy now to help others. It's these kinds of conversations, Ray, that really impact my life. And I don't know how the rest of my day is going to go. I don't. But I will say that I've learned a lot from you today. I'm honored to have you on the show. So
Thank you. I can say this. I had a very good teacher. She was bald. She was 3'9", but she packed quite a punch. And for a little girl who could barely speak, I am a man that can say that, yes, I have lived the worst human pain imaginable, which is burying your own child. There is nothing worse. At the same time, however, her life was an extraordinary gift. And I choose to believe that the next time I see that smile will be in heaven, and she will be well pleased with what we did to try to help her friends. See, I learned a lot of things from Bella. I learned that it's not the weight of the load that breaks us, it's rather how we choose to carry it. I learned not to tell God how big the problem is, but to tell the problem how big God is. And I learned that in many ways, when Bella was born with that developmental delay, and my wife and I suffered so very much going to birthday parties and being made fun of, and we so desperately wanted that normal child, what was once such a challenge, which was her developmental delays, later became an immense hidden blessing, in the sense that Bella never could fully comprehend the severity of her condition. So Bella never asked me, Daddy, am I going to die? She never asked me, Daddy, why do we have to go do these horrendous things? And I've been through 18-hour surgeries with her where her cranium was open, her abdomen was open, her spine was open. Bella, the only thing she asked for was prayer and that immense smile and those eyes that were filled with nobility and purpose, which I believe people saw something greater than themselves. You see, Bella's concerned, and she didn't live for a few weeks to a few months. We were given a gift. Bella battled valiantly for 6 years, and in that process inspired a movement to serve others, which is what it means to live like Bella. Bella was concerned about her friends. Who were her friends? Her friends were the other children battling cancer. And so on the night that she passed away, 6 years after Bella had become paralyzed and diagnosed with stage 4 cancer, which in the process, she regained the ability miraculously to walk, run, and jump. The night that she went to heaven, LeBron James and Dwayne Wade wrote #LiveLikeBella on their shoes during the finals. And it went viral. And it was such a remarkable impact on the world to see what a little girl that was so significantly, seemingly an insignificant life, if you would, the impact that she had, to the extent that the week after she passed away, Shauna, my wife, and I had the ability to meet with President Obama in Miami. We discussed helping other children and families with pediatric cancer. And from there, Live Like Bella was born. And today, I say, Tony, the same thing I said that I had the audacity by faith to say when I had the privilege of giving the eulogy at my own daughter's funeral. And that was, when you read in the obituaries that Bella Rodriguez Torres died, don't believe it, because she's more alive than she's been in her entire existence. And the proof of that has been in what's happened since. Live Like Bella, which started in this very room where we're doing this interview, which is my garage, today operates in 30 countries around the world and in every state in America. We have made possible the better part of $20 million for pediatric cancer research. And while I miss her beyond what I could express in human words, I know that she's with me each day. And we will never stop trying to help other children battling cancer in her memory.
Ray, talk to me about the organization. I know where you guys came from. I know where you guys are at now. Unbelievable work has really transformed pediatric cancer and awareness for pediatric cancer. When you look at, let's say, your 5-year strategic plan for the organization, for the foundation, what's part of your vision? How would you describe where you'd like to be in 5 years?
Well, that's a great question, because yesterday there was a lot of elections across the country and the primaries and so forth. And yesterday there was a very significant win for the childhood cancer community. That is something that I feel very proud of and very intimately involved in. And so when I tell you where the next 5 years is, I do have to make mention of what happened yesterday. And so as you and I started speaking in the outset and have shared, right, we've both had the privilege of being in the pharmaceutical industry for some degree, and I was in the industry for 21 years and in varying capacities of responsibility. But one of the things that I had the honor of being involved in for a long time was drug development, specifically for cancer. Ironically, for pediatric cancer, there's very little drug development, but in the adult space, certainly. And it's very frustrating when you look at the fact that over the last 30 years, of the 12 major types of pediatric cancers, only 2 have improved in survivability, and that's lymphoma and leukemia in children. The other 10 major types of pediatric cancers, there's been 0 improvement in survivability in the last 30 years. One of the reasons for that is because there is no drug development in that area. And so I want to say 3 days after Bella passed away, just part of my catharsis of dealing with the grief of losing her was to begin writing a law. And originally I called it the Bella Bill. And the purpose of the Bella Bill was to encourage the pharmaceutical industry that has so much innovative capital on so many levels to begin testing drugs that they're developing for adult cancers on childhood cancers, but to do it in a way that they would not be jeopardizing the advancement of their drug for breast cancer or adult lung cancer or prostate cancer, which obviously are markets where there are a significantly larger number of patients and greater economic opportunity. But at the same time, I wanted children's tumors to be tested in a way where children might eventually have an opportunity at innovative drugs, which has never existed before. Well, for the last 6 years, working with different members of Congress, working with the White House, working with other childhood cancer organizations, and evolving that idea in partnership with the pharmaceutical industry, yesterday, the Race for Children Act was passed. And moving forward, beginning next year, from now on, anytime a new drug for adult cancer is developed in early stage development, that tumor of children, the 12 major types of pediatric cancers, will also be tested against those new innovative drugs that were originally developed for adults. And if there is a hit of effectiveness in the laboratory, then the pharmaceutical companies will have to run at least a phase 2 trial in children with that particular drug moving forward.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
So that is a very significant win, and that is very important. Within the next 5 years, I'd like to see more and more drug development happening, which thanks to the Race for Children Act, I believe we'll see just inherently. I'd like to see, and I believe we will see, greater funding at a national level for childhood cancer specifically. And believe it or not, one of the great initiatives that we have going on right now, and I had the privilege of being in the White House for meetings on this subject twice last summer, has to do with more funding, but with more funding comes something that is difficult to talk about, but it's critically important. And believe it or not, that's death certificates. So here's what I mean by that. The statistics around childhood cancer are very difficult to pinpoint. When you look at childhood cancer, oftentimes they'll say it's very rare cancer. Pediatric cancers are very rare. And by and large, in comparison to adult, they are. However, each day, somewhere between 43 and 47 children in the United States are diagnosed with cancer. So that's about 2 classrooms full of children. And each day, just in the United States, 7 children die of cancer. Now, sadly, we don't hear anything of this on the news, but it happens every day. And so much so that pediatric cancer is the #1 disease killer of children and remains so. Well, here's part of the problem. Although that's very sad to hear, one of the things that we realized is that the majority of deaths by children with cancer are not classified by death by cancer. So for example, when Shauna and I received Bella's death certificate and the cause of death was listed as rhabdomyosarcoma, we high-fived each other. And the reason why we did is because Bella was counted. Incredibly, give you an example and a contrast to that, as Shauna and as I was in a taxi heading to the White House for a meeting, I was calling other parents of children who have passed of cancer, friends of mine, to ask them for something very uncomfortable. And that was, I was asking them to send me a photograph of their child's death certificate. And the reason why is because by and large, and I would say 8 out of 10 times, the cause of death was listed as something else other than cancer. Sepsis, heart failure, kidney failure, natural causes. And all of those things are to some degree accurate. But what caused that kidney failure? Childhood cancer. What caused that sepsis? Childhood cancer. And so here's the point. In life and in business and in any organization, you cannot begin to tackle a problem to bring forward a solution unless you understand the size and scope of the problem. If children are being classified as dying as something else, then it's very difficult to understand the nature and how many children are actually dying of cancer. Therefore, you can't ask the government, you can't ask people to fund the solution to a problem unless you understand the size and scope of the problem. So believe it or not, one of the things that I'd like to see in the next 5 years is that federally and in every state, death certificates include a simple checkbox for pediatric cancer. There's legal precedence for this. In the 1970s, the government wanted to know how many pregnant women were dying of varying causes, whether it was car accident, violence, drug addiction, whatever it was. And they didn't know. And the moment they added a simple checkbox to death certificates, all of a sudden we found that far more pregnant women were passing away from varied issues than ever expected. The same can happen in pediatric cancer. And that will be a very important big step that I'd like to see in the next 5 years, just as one thing.
Congratulations on that, by the way. You know, I'm sitting here and I'm listening to, you know, how proficient and how educated you have become as a result of Bella's passing. And when you look at the leadership principles that you're currently anchored to as president CEO of an organization, but you're also the founder and, you know, CEO of Live Like Bella, you know, oftentimes you have to take the emotional component out of this thing that we call leadership. What are some of your leadership principles and what are they anchored to?
Well, number one, though I fail daily, my anchor is to be a servant leader. I believe that the greatest example of servant leadership the world and the universe has ever known was born on December 25th, and his name is Jesus Christ. I try to emulate that, though I fail significantly. I serve as the chairman of the board of Live Like Bella, and that's an important distinction. I'm not the CEO of Live Like Bella, and I've never wanted to be the CEO of Live Like Bella. We're very blessed to have a CEO. Her name is Nicole de Lara Puente, who runs the daily operations with a remarkable team of folks. For them, Live Like Bella is not a full-time job. It's not a part-time job. It's an all-the-time job. And so that's an important distinction because I'm not employed by Live Like Bella. In the history of Live Like Bella, there's never been a check to Raymond Rodriguez Torres, and there never will be. I do make a living by being the CEO of ALC Home Health, which is my day job. But the reason why I say that's important is because I believe it's far more effective as a leader to light a fire within someone than under someone. I am probably a very poor manager, and I would say that I am an emerging leader, continuously striving to be better. At the end of the day, one of the things that is critically important, I believe, is that we look back on our lives and say, what did we accomplish? And ultimately, what did we accomplish for the betterment of others? I have attended more funerals, particularly of children and of people, than I would ever want anyone to attend. And I have been by the bedside of many people towards the end of their existence here on earth. And I have never met a moment where folks find themselves in a situation where they feel that they should have done more for themselves. It's the opposite. I wish I would have done more for others. Ultimately, and ironically, in the deepest moments of grief and darkness in my life, I always found the greatest joy when I was doing something to help someone else. Even though that particular moment, I may have needed the help the most. And so that experience in my life translates to what I believe my leadership philosophy is. If I continuously strive to help others, I notice that good things happen. If I stay with a very noble cause and purpose, and if I'm able to inspire that into other folks so that their work has meaning, we will always go above and beyond.
It's the same principle I often tell, you know, men and women that I'm currently working on as you know, we identify areas of opportunity to light that fire and then ultimately shed that old self and become that new self. And this whole principle around service is so impactful and so important, regardless of whatever it is that you're struggling with. For me personally, it's an opportunity to get out of self, right? And doesn't matter whether you're pouring coffee in an AA meeting or stacking chairs after a meeting, or, you know, going to the correctional facilities and talking to, you know, incarcerated men about, you know, recovery and how beautiful it is. And once they get out, or they may not get out, just embracing this life of recovery. That to me is much more impactful than anything I can ever describe that I'm able to get from living in the material world. I think it's biblical, one. Two, it works for me. It's obviously part of the AA principles, which, you know, there's no secret here. They are derived from the Bible. Bill Wilson did that back in the 1930s when he had his epiphany, and obviously he saw the light. And so I love that. when I look at Ray Rodriguez Torres and I think of, I'm fascinated with routine. I am a routine guy. I need to kind of stick to my routine. Doesn't always, happen that way because sometimes there's something that gets in the way, and that's called life. But when I put up my feet on the floor, I typically have the same routine. What's Ray's routine in the morning?
So one of the things that I strongly subscribe to is nourishment. So each day, I and all of us nourish our bodies. Some of us are guilty of doing it more than we should. We nourish our minds and our intellect, whether we do it knowingly by reading something, educating ourselves, or by default, by the things around us, we will become educated. And our intellect and our thoughts will be shaped by the things around us. And sadly, in that aspect, some of the things that surround us are not always good. But the question that I've always had is, what about our soul? What about my soul? Am I purposely nourishing my soul? And if I'm not, then is it, like my intellect, also being influenced by things that are around me that potentially may not always be good? So the answer to your question is that my daily routine begins with me doing a purposeful nourishment of my soul. And here's what this looks like. So I subscribe to a listserv that sends me a piece of scripture that I can read in 120 seconds, has a reflection about the life of Christ. And when I wake up in the morning, before I pick up my phone and read the first email that is some sort of problem lingering from the night before I log on to social media to see what's happening in the world, before I read some tragedy in the news and so forth and so on, if I'm going to stick something in my system to nourish my soul, the first thing I'm going to do is read scripture. That's my routine. It takes discipline because I am tempted to see that email. Oh God, what happened last night? What emergency? But before I do that, the first thing I put in my system, in my soul, is some scripture, some reflection, and some prayer. Then I'm ready to tackle whatever it is that's coming.
Beautiful. Ray, when you look at, all the fantastic things that you do, and, I would say, for me personally, I'm really proud of, where I came from, where I am. But for me, it's always like looking at where I'm going. That's the reason why, your front windshield is a lot bigger than your rear view mirror. And that's where I keep my eyes focused. But despite that, there's things that I'm working on as I'm building a business, building a brand, and I'm still obviously leading, large teams in leadership development. For me, it's self-care, self-love, right? How do I slow down to take care of me? And I sometimes wrestle with that because I will say, well, like Ray, I start my day in scripture. I start my day with meditation. I don't do anything until that is scratched off. Despite that, at 11 o'clock at night, sometimes I am exhausted, and more so than I should be. And I think it's because of a lot of what I carry up here, and sometimes that's a circus, but just the physical demands of the job also weigh into how tired I am. For me, it's self-care, right? So slowing down and making sure that I don't put a priority to everything, because that's something that I'm guilty of. What are you working on, Ray?
Well, I in many respects, a lot of the same thing. I'm guilty of taking on a lot more potentially than I should at all times. Physical exercise is something that's been, is always of great benefit, but I'm not as disciplined in that regard as I should be. I've gone through periods, for example, if you get a chance and visit livelikebella.org or look at some of the news clippings, I've ridden a bicycle with Miami police from Miami to Orlando, and then later from Miami to Key West. And I can promise you that I am not a cyclist by any means. And I can also tell you that the part of my body that's associated with the seat of the bicycle is still angry at me for the 300 miles that I've ridden from Miami to Orlando. But there was a great deal of purpose, behind doing that in Bella's memory and raising funds for for Live Like Bella and childhood cancer research. But definitely physical exercise is something that's important, something I need to schedule more of. And I think taking a little bit more time also for myself for decompression. One of the things that I'll say that I'm guilty of is right after Bella passed away, I had someone give me some advice with regards to the movement that was Live Like Bella, which was never let this momentum die. And that there's a lot of truth to that. When you're given the gift of a global movement in something so meaningful, you have to take advantage of it. But at the same time, as I reflect now, as we will be entering the 7th year of Bella's passing, it's been nonstop. Granted, there's been a lot of fruits to that labor for the cause, but it's been a lot of heavy lifting. And taking the time to reflect on that, to enjoy that, to refocus is something that I need to do with greater frequency.
Excellent. Ray, I thanked you for this upfront, and we look at our busy schedules, and in those busy schedules, there's a slew of conference calls and meetings. I want to thank you for this finite resource that we have leveraged and taken advantage of today, and that's time. I'm indebted to you. I really am. I learned a lot about you as a person, you as a leader, but you as a Christian. And that last one is as important as the previous two. I want to continue our dialogue. I will be cheering for you from the sidelines every step of the way. And so with that, I wanted to thank you once again, a sincere thank you for your time, your consideration, everything you've shared, the vulnerability that comes with sharing the passing of your daughter. And so with that, I wanted to thank you for your time.
Oh, thank you. It's been a pleasure. And thank you all for your prayers, for your support, for having me on today. And may we always live like Bella.